these companies to have predictability as they move forward. So in our world, allows these companies to have predictability as they move forward. So in our world, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I know y'all got a lot of work to do, and I know y'all are reviewing everything, but we really appreciate all the stuff that you've done for us. And last but not least, I want to thank the Department of Economic Development, Commissioner Pat Wilson, the governor, of course, and his team. It's been amazing the past few years, and we've been very fortunate to work with everybody, and we're just very thankful for all the success. So thank y'all for being here today. Thank you for all that you do, and we wish you the best of luck as you go through the process. Thank you. Whoever's up next.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I forgot one important thing. The city is not going to be monitoring the parking. So if you saw something that says pay or whatever, you only have an hour, don't worry about it. We talked to the city, and they're going to hopefully be nice. So thank you.
While Dr. Toma makes his way up, I thought we'd take just a minute and very briefly introduce the panelists. I'll run down the House side, Chairman Huffstedler, if you want to run down the Senate side. I'm going to hand the mic over. My name's Shaw Blackman. I chair the Ways and Means Committee in the House.
Matt Hatchett, Chairman of Appropriations in the House.
My name is Chuck Martin from the 49th District. I chair Higher Ed and serve with Chairman Blackman on Ways and Means.
I'm Debbie Buckner. I'm a member of Ways and Means and Appropriations, but I don't chair anything.
Casey Carpenter, and I did not get overserved last night. I got an eye injury, so these sunglasses are not to hide the hangover. Representative Dalton, Georgia, Creative Arts and Entertainment Chairman, Ways and Means.
All right, we've got a couple of members doing it remotely, and Senator Rhett's here somewhere in town. I don't know. We should be here shortly. Anyway, Chuck Huffstedler, I chair the Finance Committee.
John Albers, Senator North Fulton, Cherokee and Cobb, Vice Chair Finance and Chair Public Safety.
I'm Blake Tillery. I'm Chairman of Appropriations and Senator from the 19th District, most of Southeast Georgia.
Of $58,000 a year. That's going to pump about $470 million into the regional economy in terms of wages and earnings. That's going to stimulate what I referred to as economic ripple jobs of the order of about 4,600 jobs. So once we start to add all those up, that's about 20,000 jobs itself associated with the facility, its suppliers, and the recirculation of the earnings in the regional economy. To put that number into context, that's 10% of our employment base associated with just one facility. We approximately have about 200,000 jobs in our Savannah metropolitan area, so adding 20,000 to that is certainly altering and changing the nature of the economic fabric in the region in a very meaningful way. The 14,000 roughly, direct and indirect, the manufacturing facility and the supplier jobs, if those are added into the manufacturing category, which most likely they will, this is the most stunning figure to me. It's a 75% increase in the manufacturing base in our regional economy. Just associated with one facility, a 75% increase in the manufacturing base in our regional economy. We know that manufacturing jobs pay well above average in terms of the salaries in the metropolitan area. The $5,800, $105 annual wage of the earners of the facility at the Hyundai plant, that's 25% higher than the service sector wage in the Savannah MSA, and it's also 11% higher than the average private sector job in the metropolitan statistical area. So this is certainly going to have a significant influence on the nature of the economic structure of our regional economy. The fiscal impacts associated with the operation of the facility itself, so just the 8,100 jobs on site. For the 4 counties, the Joint Development Authority here, that is going to result in a net present value increase of about $114 million over a 20-year period horizon of analysis. So that does include the cost of providing public services, including first responders, police, EMT, cost of providing government services, anything that you can think of, water, sewer, utilities, cost of local government. That includes that in that net present value fiscal impact analysis. It also includes the cost of providing public school education to the children who would be associated with the workers at the facility itself. And it includes an analysis of the locally provided incentives for the facility, including property tax abatement and the upfront subsidies. I mentioned the $470 million in wages and earnings every year at full development at 8,100 workers. That alone is going to generate approximately $226 million worth of taxable retail sales. So there's a significant knock-on type effect from the facility itself on local government finances. And again, just focusing on the facility itself, the expectation is that there will be about 3,100 new households that will form in the area as a result of this. That's about 9,000 persons, or roughly a 2.7% increase in the local population base as a result of the operation of the facility. And it's interesting, if you think about where these folks are going to live, they have a wide variety of options to select from in terms of distance to the facility that is a reasonable commute. Everything from the urban core in Savannah, if a person is interested in living there, that opportunity is there. That's about a 30-minute drive. If folks are interested in a suburban type living, there are many areas in West Chatham and Bryan County that would support that are within 20 to 25 minutes of the facility itself. If folks are interested in a university town, the city of Statesboro, and the associated college university amenities would be associated with a large-scale university, that's only about 40 minutes away. And they're in the rural area, in the immediate vicinity of the facility. There are around the order of 10 to 15 small towns. If a person would like to live in a small town, there are at least a dozen to 15 of those within 30 to 35-minute commute of the facility itself. And to put things into perspective, the average commute in Georgia is about 30 minutes, and in our metro area it varies from about 28 minutes to 32 minutes, depending on the county. So this is a very reasonable range within which these opportunities for growth and development would occur in a wide variety of residential type communities in the area surrounding the facility. To wrap things up a little bit, I would offer that this is going to substantially, the facility itself, which of course is incentivized, is going to substantially and meaningfully alter the economic fabric of this regional economy. It's going to create and enhance economic opportunity throughout the region, and not just for the workers who are employed at the facility or its suppliers, because you think about what would happen to kind of, again, sort of think about it as a knock-on effect. As individuals who already have jobs in the region are recruited to work at this facility, it's going to create opportunities for growth, development, promotion, and advancement at their current employers. So it's not just the economic activity, the jobs at the facility and the suppliers. As folks may be recruited into working for those companies, it creates upward mobility for individuals who already have jobs here. So these career opportunities through promotion and development will be widespread throughout the region. Think about the small business opportunities that are going to be present to serve the workers at the suppliers, the plant itself, the suppliers, the add-on jobs from the recirculation of the $470 million of wages earned every year. There's going to be a wide variety of opportunities, again, across all the types of residential development, whether it's urban core in Savannah, suburban development, small town development, university town development. Their opportunities for small businesses are going to be widespread. To use a phrase that you may have heard of, this is going to lift all boats, legitimately. For our Savannah metro area, it's going to significantly, meaningfully, and in positive ways alter the economic fabric of the region. If I might just offer one bit of suggestion, humbly offered, if there might be a way to encourage our local municipal governments to accelerate their planning process to account for population growth, that would be a good thing, and also to carefully consider the issue of affordable housing in the context of the population growth that we are expected to see associated with development of the plant and operation of it. So that will close my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn the mic back to you.
Any questions from the committee on this? And I will say in my district, we've got the SK battery plant in Bartow County coming, 3,500 new employees. So we're going to be looking at similar good problems and bad problems with that. And I think the good's going to by far outweigh the bad, but it is challenging when you talk about housing and workforce and all that, it's going to be a challenge up there as well.
Any questions?
Obviously, very thorough. Thanks for getting us kicked off, Dr. Toma.
Appreciate you being here and appreciate the information you delivered.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question, if you don't mind, Chairman Blattman.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. We had a
You're
question.
fine.
Yes.
Dr. Toma, thank you so much. I'm Blake Tiller. I'm from Vidalia, so not too far away from you. So some of the things you've said, I've got questions just to follow up to get some context. You mentioned 20,000 jobs. Is there any other industry that you know of? Can you give us an example of another plant in our area, or heck, it might be a military base for all I know, that has created that type of job growth in an area so we can just have some type of context?
We are very fortunate in Savannah to have a manufacturing facility and research and development facility that you may be aware of, this Gulfstream Enterprises. That's comparable. It's larger in magnitude in terms of direct employment at the facility itself, so that's the scale of operation that we're referring to. It's similar, somewhat slightly smaller than the Gulfstream operation, so that's a very significant impact on our regional economy as well.
And the one other question I had was, you mentioned if you could offer one small piece of advice to us was about municipal planning. Have you seen in your research, or what even anecdotally, a community that seems to be ahead of that, doing that better, that we could look to, that you might point us to say, hey, look here, these guys did it right, that we can maybe replicate and point others towards?
I wish I could offer that guidance. I'm not well versed in that literature, but that certainly sounds like a very useful and practical research agenda to pursue, to see what are the best practices for communities that have faced these sort of issues. We may look to the north and west at the Kia plant, for example. But those sorts of developments and the communities in those areas have faced or will face similar challenges. There are a large number of mega-scale type investments in electric vehicle and battery plant facilities across the country on the order of easily $50 to $75 billion within the last, say, 5 years or so. So there should be a wide enough, to say, sample of communities that could be reviewed and considered to see exactly how they address that issue. And again, with the idea of identifying best practices so that we can learn from others' experiences, both, as you say, good and bad. How do we get there from here?
Thank you. I may follow up with you later on and see what you got on that. Appreciate it.
Representative Buckner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great presentation and wonderful development. I have two quick questions, hopefully. One is, do you have any suggestions of how communities can address, or what they need to help address the affordable housing? And then the other one is, what were the incentives that you think were the best incentives to lure Hyundai here so that we'll know for other future developments?
These are starting to address issues that are really outside of my area of expertise, so I think I may prefer to defer in general on that in terms of which specific incentives matter the most to firms. I know there's an academic literature on that I am not well versed in, so I could not point to a specific item on the list and say it was this one. I would offer that collectively, these all matter to firms when they're evaluating different locations for growth and development and the establishment of new facilities. There's a significant amount of competition among states and municipalities for these types of operations. And my casual observation is that in the state of Georgia, these are projects that are pursued rationally and thoughtfully. And my sense is that there's not the desire to give away the store just to attract a few thousand jobs. I think there's a very rational, careful, and planning approach that is associated with the recruitment and incentivizing of projects in the state of Georgia. With respect to planning for growth and development, I'm going to have to offer that one over to the planning specialists. I'm an economist, so I know there's a lot of complication, nuts and bolts and wheels to be turned and gears perhaps to grind a little bit in terms of laying out a planning process that may take several years when you think about, all right, we're going to identify this parcel for residential, commercial, or industrial development. It may take 2 or 3 years, for example, for a house to be plotted on residential, on a new identified parcel for residential development. So accelerating that process in some way would be great. I wish I could offer specific guidance about that and how to make that happen, but I'm unable to do so.
Did you see it, Chairman Martin?
To follow, two things, I guess. With the plant going 22 miles west of here, and you talked about the various places that people could live, and this may be not for today, but tell me where we could find this information. It worries me when something goes in that large that one county benefits the most from a tax base, if you will. I mean, I know there were some incentives for the actual footprint of the plant and so forth, and the other county has to do a lot of infrastructure for people to get there. For instance, all the homes go in one area, but there's a road between that area and the plant that needs to be improved, so that goes into a county that doesn't get the tax base influx. So just the economics of that. And then also in conjunction with that, you said this plant is, like your analogy, the rising tide lifts all boats. And then you told us we need to worry about affordable housing. Well, if salaries are going up, if those things are going up, how is it that housing is going to become less affordable? Are you concerned that the inflationary impacts of all the building materials needed at one time is going to make that happen? So I'm curious to see if incomes are going up in a region, it seems like we'd have less of an affordability issue than we do now.
With regard to your second question about affordable housing, I would offer that in combination with the planning process and the free market, there should be opportunities to develop affordable housing in the region. One of the more significant costs associated with residential development is land costs. Land costs would be lower in the more rural areas in the surrounding area of around the plant itself within 35 to 40 minutes. So there are opportunities. I would offer that there may be lower cost residential land available for development that would contribute to this idea of affordable housing in the region. So I tend to philosophically believe that the free market has the ability to allocate resources in an efficient manner, but I think in combination with a planning process.
You believe that that will happen, that it's not going to take government interference? That was the question.
I believe that the planning process could augment that free market process, right? So that,
Just maybe, I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but just, you have any other thoughts overall? I know we're focused kind of on some of the economic development tools here, and we'll be looking at other things as we, go across the state, but overall tax policy in Georgia, didn't know if you had any other observations that you might want to share with us, Dr. Toma.
again, I'll defer that to the public finance specialists. I'm an urban and sort of regional generalist economist, so things get very much into the weeds on tax policy. But to echo what Mr. Tollison said, you don't get to be number one in the country in terms of business climate for 9 years in a row without doing something right. So in that sense, as he says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We got to tweak things around the edges as things are required, but fundamentally, Georgia's well-positioned and has performed and outperformed its peers in the Southeast over the last decade or so.
Fair enough, thank you.
Quick question. I might have missed it. I came in a little late. I was trying to park in the wrong place. But the job tax credit seems to be a good economic incentive. Is there any certain criteria to get that job tax credit or any particular industry?
I have to defer on the fine analysis of the details of the tax credits. That's not an area of specialization. I'm sorry.
I guess I'll get the final one. Help me out with this math. I just don't understand. I get 20,000 jobs expected at the facility. You said we thought 2.7% growth or 9,100 new people in the area. I'm guessing the makeup then would come from people in this area already here moving up a level of jobs. But what then happens? Do you expect then that the lower level jobs mechanize or go away? Or help me understand that delta between the 9,100 new people but the 20,000 jobs.
The 9,100 new people, approximately in terms of population change, would be associated specifically with the plant itself, the 8,100 jobs there at the facility. So some of the workers at that facility will be recruited out of the local area. It is likely that a majority of those individuals at the plant will migrate to this area from somewhere else, most likely from within the state of Georgia. But there will be some in-migration from out of the state. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. Could you remind me?
And it could be just you have a lot better grasp of it than I do when I'm asking. But I'm getting the deltas. If you got 9,100 people moving in, we got 20,000 new jobs. I get it that in the area, we'll move some people up to a higher job that'll be at this facility. They'll make more money, as you spoke about, the rising tide raising the ships. What do you expect happens then to their lower level jobs? Do you expect those get filled? Do they go away? Do they mechanize? Because I'm trying to figure out how I get a delta with 20,000 new jobs, but only 9,100 people to fill them.
Well, in terms of total population associated with the facility, I would offer it would be on the order of about 20,000 people, a little bit more. So the math effectively would be about 9,100 new persons associated with the 8,100 jobs. And so the additional knock-on type jobs, the supply chain jobs, the jobs that are created as a result of recirculating income, those also would stimulate in-migration and population growth along with, so it's the 9,100 is associated more specifically with the 8,100 jobs at the plant. And so there would be additional population growth on about the same order of magnitude to support the spillover or knock-on type effect jobs. To the extent that they would be mechanized, I think we'll see sufficient in-migration to fill the jobs that we need, in addition to the efforts that are the carefully thought out efforts I would offer that are being developed to establish a pipeline of talent for the facility itself associated with the institutions of higher education in the area, the technical colleges and things of that sort. So there is an effort to supply that plant with the labor that it needs locally, as well as what we can expect in terms of in-migration.
All right, we certainly appreciate, we appreciate your presentation and the information, and look forward to growth in this area for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
If Georgia Ports is next, if you want to make your way up, and this has certainly been a shining star for the state, from the mega rail system to the inland ports. I know we've got one up in northwest Georgia. Have some brilliant logistics people apparently, because we seem to be out servicing the other ports and sort of the envy of the country. And one other thing I'll add, unless the numbers have changed, my area of northwest Georgia, while it's the furthest from Savannah, does the most business with the port, and it's great for the whole state.
That's elected leadership at work right there.
The House members in that area do a great job.
Exceptional, along with the Senate. So my name is Jamie McCurry, for those that I don't know. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at GPA, and I was told that Dr. Toma was going to wow you with a bunch of PowerPoints with some, dazzle and whatnot, and I'd have like 5 minutes to just say something. So here we are. Good job, Dr. Toma. That is all. I think that most of you have probably been inundated over time with the story of the port and who we are and how we work, et cetera, but maybe not so much how we specifically work on economic development projects. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to explain that and then answer any questions you might have. But so for GPA, effectively we are a state-owned business. We're operationally self-sufficient. We generate the revenues to cover all the expenses of the operation and our CapEx. Our customer that pays the bills is the steamship line. But we have our sales department is basically divided into 3 groups. We have carrier sales, who really are the ones that are working directly with the bill payers, if you will. Then we have a group that's focused on what we call BCO sales, or beneficial cargo owner sales. So they're working with the importers and the exporters, growing their business, attracting new business, et cetera. Sometimes that involves a new economic development project. Sometimes it's just matriculating growth from existing customers. And then the third leg of that stool is the economic development department itself. So we have a director of industrial and economic development, whose job it is really to partner with the development authorities around the state, certainly to partner with the Department of Economic Development and Commissioner Wilson's team, and work in parallel on those projects. It's not our job necessarily to land economic development projects, but it is our mission to help create jobs and foster trade for the state of Georgia. So we work closely with development authorities around the state and the state as a whole to accomplish that. And I think that, I guess in doing a little bit of storytelling, when it comes to tax credits, the BEST program is one that's, I think, been very valuable for the state of Georgia in recruiting projects to the state. About 20 years ago, a small group of us, and frankly it was when we were working on the JCB project, which is a local manufacturing facility. But to get it over the kind of the finish line, we needed to come up with something that was a little bit more than what was in the kitty to begin with. And so we created, with the help of, and Mr. Stevens is here, and he was a great help to us then. But we added on kind of a bolt-on to the BEST program, this ports job tax credit that allowed, candidate industries to come in, and if they were meeting all the criteria of the BEST program and also were growing trade through the ports, there could be just a little bit more. And that was a big key in getting JCB here. And that program, that's a local example, I guess. But when you look at whether it is Northwest Georgia, Northeast Georgia, Southwest Georgia, throughout the state, there are projects that we've worked on that don't necessarily seem like they're port projects because they're so far away, but they are trading through the ports and are benefiting from the BEST program as a whole, as well as that port jobs tax credit addition. We're impacting well over 500,000 jobs a year in the state, just the port operations, and a lot of that has to do with the work of the folks in this room, again, recruiting new business as well as growing the existing industry in the state. And with that little storytelling, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I knew you'd be exhausted by Dr. Thoma's PowerPoint, so that's the extent of my presentation.
Pretty loud. That's better. All right, just a quick question, follow-up. Obviously, I'm up in Dalton. Chatsworth has a port rail system you guys have up there. And my question to you is, do you see that, I guess the feeling I have about it is that there's a lot of one-way traffic headed up there, and is there a remedy in the future to kind of help alleviate, just because I know dead legs are tough in your industry, and so the question is, what is the capability of us producing stuff that up in the northwest corner that will actually leave the country and be more beneficial for the port itself?
Sure. So I think, and I'm going to overly generalize and say it's about a 70-30 ratio, I believe, import to export going through that facility. And you're right, the more balanced, and this on import-export at the terminal on the ships is on import-export if it's coming and going from one of the rail facilities. Anytime you got balance, this opportunity to be more profitable. I think when you look at what works in terms of as a rail destination, it's distance and volume to kind of get you to the math. You've got anchor industry up there. Certainly the flooring industry is huge. They're great customers of ours, and it is a strong export industry. Continuing to grow manufacturing in any area is going to create export opportunity. Not that all manufacturing is export. A lot of it is certainly domestic. But just looking at more opportunities to develop manufacturing in an area is going to help with the export. Of course, Georgia's largest industry, period, is agriculture. And so there are areas where, like we do have a planned port in west central Georgia. It would be very near the Kia plant, and that is an anchor, kind of like an anchor at a shopping center. But the balance to that is the ag that's going to be coming out of that area. And so in time, when we're able to develop that facility, it probably will be a little more balanced right at the start because of the heavier ag coming out of that area. But ag and manufacturing is your export opportunity out of Georgia. Yes, sir. Okay.
Thank you for what you do. Appreciate the presentation this morning and for being with us.
It's a great opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Next time I'll have PowerPoint. That's what everybody wants.
All right, next we've got the panel discussion with our Savannah Regional Business Advisors, if you want to make your way up. And I did finally, after not being able to a few times, get to go through the Gulfstream facility yesterday for about 3 hours. It was a really good presentation of what they do there.
This one?
This one.
Okay. You know, all that, yeah. Where you want to sit?
Going to kick it off, Mr. Brantley?
Yes, sir, absolutely. All right, well, thanks again. I just add my appreciation for all the businesses that are represented here and what you do for Georgia and Georgians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be here this morning. In honor of our friends, Chris Clark and Kevin Perry, I didn't wear socks this morning. If you guys are at the congressional lunch, I hear chamber execs are not supposed to wear socks, so I'm trying to get into that mode after being 20 years in government. So really glad to be here. My name is Burt Brantley. I'm President and CEO of the Savannah Area Chamber of Commerce. It's great to see so many friends in the room. I've been down here since February, and frankly, I moved down with my family because of the opportunity that you heard Tripp and Dr. Toma talk about. This region is really poised. It's been an incredible place for 290 years now. The city has been really a beautiful spot for here on the coast and for our state, but we're really poised to do something really special down here. And really, if you look at the growth that's happening in Savannah, it tracks the state's strategic industries. If you look at advanced manufacturing, which you're going to hear about with Hyundai,
and with JCB that Jamie talked about, with aviation and Gulfstream and what's going on over there. With our tourism and visitation economy, the state has invested almost $300 million in expanding our convention center across the river. And so we're about to see, we've already seen a lot of growth in that space. We're about to see even more as well. Logistics and the port business that you heard about from Jamie. And so, and then of course our film industry, which has been here for a number of years, but has increased certainly as the tax credit came in, and we've seen a lot of that work here as well. And so really across all of these really strategic industries that the state has put a priority on, we've seen that growth happen here in Savannah. So a lot of that's due certainly to the state leadership and making those areas a priority, but then also our local leadership, which was welcoming of all that. Over my career, I've been in meetings with a lot of y'all as we tried to figure this stuff out, both on the tax credit side as well as on the balancing the budget side, and it's difficult. And I can tell you that we appreciate the position that you guys are in to try to balance how we fund the necessary activities of government, that we also be competitive, and that we are helping our industries create new jobs for our citizens, and higher paying jobs where they can raise the quality of life for their families, and then also participate in our communities as well. So it's been an honor to be a part of the system for a couple of decades now. Could not be prouder of our team over the Department of Economic Development and what all they've done, and then the role that you guys have played in helping us to really be the envy of a lot of our neighbors and a lot of folks around the country who we compete with, and really proud of the story that you're going to continue to hear as you go around the state and you think about all these different growth areas that we have. So I'm really pleased to get out of the way and let these guys next to us talk. We'll go one at a time and introduce them individually. We'll start with Gulfstream. The world's best business jets are built right here in Savannah. Not just built, but also all the R&D is done here, and with a lot of Georgia-educated engineers and designers that are here, not only doing the cabins and the wings, all the aerodynamics, and really proud of Dr. Toma mentioned the incredible economic impact those guys have as well. I'm not able to purchase a Gulfstream myself, but I am able to be proud of them being here. And so Mark Bennett is here. He's pinch hitting today. Jay Neely had a little moving injury that he's recovering from, and so Mark has stepped in. Mark's been a part of all these conversations and is going to share with us a little bit about Gulfstream's story and how they have chosen to expand here in Georgia when they certainly could have went in other places.
Good evening, or good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for inviting us to make a few remarks regarding Georgia's tax policy, specifically tax credits and exemptions. Tax policy is a tool, particularly in economic development, to encourage companies to undertake activities which may have short-term costs but result in long-term benefits. And when you think about the many tax credits under review here in Georgia, they are often used as tools to encourage certain actions, sending signals to the marketplace to encourage actions that are likely to result in broader and bigger benefits in the future. Many of these tax policies encourage companies to make investments today that will pay off big tomorrow. I have a firsthand account of the investments Gulfstream has made in Georgia due to your leadership in crafting Georgia's tax policies. Year after year, Gulfstream investments in Savannah and Brunswick have created high-paying jobs for Georgians. Gulfstream relocated its headquarters to Savannah in 1967 for the stable, positive business environment. And in 1999, General Dynamics purchased Gulfstream, and due to the same stable, positive business environment that Georgia leaders have created today, General Dynamics has invested over $1.5 billion in Gulfstream, Georgia, making Gulfstream the largest manufacturer in the state in terms of employees, over 12,000, and a payroll which is $1.2 billion annually. The state's tax policies enabled and encouraged much of this growth. For example, since the passage of the sales tax exemption on parts and labor used in maintenance of general aviation aircraft, Gulfstream maintenance business has grown so much that there is now more general aviation maintenance done at the Savannah Airport than any airport in the world. In fact, nearly 3,000 Gulfstream jobs with an average salary of $87,000 per year, not including benefits, are in Georgia because Gulfstream customers choose to fly their aircraft to Georgia for maintenance, flying over many states who do charge the sales tax. Additionally, these customers come to Georgia with the aircraft and stay in local hotels and local restaurants for several days and even several months. In fact, nearly 400 hotel rooms every night are booked by Gulfstream customers, suppliers, and visitors. Similarly, the R&D tax credit drives research and development that requires highly technical and highly paid professional aerospace. General Dynamics has maintained its commitment to performing 100% of all of our research activities here in Georgia. We have nearly 3,000 employees here in Savannah who work in our innovation and research labs with an average salary of $155,000 per year, not including benefits. It's important to realize all new Gulfstream technologies and aircraft are Georgia grown, and our primary competitors are based in France, Canada, and Brazil. New innovation is a competitive advantage for Gulfstream as we compete against these foreign-based manufacturers. Our competitive environment requires Gulfstream to continually invest in research and innovation. And we are investing in research and new technologies to manufacture aircraft that are bigger, can fly faster and further and safer, more efficiently with less noise pollution and higher quality than our competitors. It's also important to know that we invest the tax credits back into the business and the state. Gulfstream investments in support of R&D in Georgia extends beyond its gates and into the local community. Those investments support R&D for aerospace and other industries and include substantial contributions to public educational institutions for development of a highly skilled Georgian workforce who can support the growing R&D economy. For example, we've invested more than $10 million in the Savannah-Chatham County public school system to fund the pipeline for our engineering jobs and our touch labor. Savannah Technical College and TCSG, nearly $1 million invested in the local Savannah Tech to fund our manufacturing and our maintenance programs. And Georgia universities, Georgia Southern University College of Engineering and UGA College of Engineering, more than $3 million. In fact, Gulfstream hires more engineers from Georgia Southern than any other employer in the state. As Gulfstream celebrates its 56th year in Georgia, it supports the state's continued focus on tax policies like the tax exemption on maintenance and R&D credit. Both encourage high-quality jobs in Georgia and an expanding economy state. Mr. Chairman, committee members, appreciate your time today and your unwavering leadership in continuing to support Georgia being a great place to do business.
Thanks, Mark. Chairman, you want to wait till after we get through for questions? I do want to point out that Mark grew up in Blackshear, Georgia, and he is not the most famous Bennett from Blackshear. Evidently, there are multiple Bennett clans in Blackshear that he can't claim to be related to our two-time national champion quarterback. Very pleased to introduce Chris Smith next. Chris is the general counsel over at Hyundai, has moved into our community from Montgomery. I've gotten to know Chris over the past few months. Really, really pleased to have somebody over there that answers their phone, which Chris does. And I know he's getting sick, mostly of trip, not as much with me. But Chris has really been a great addition to our community, has really been our connection point to our local leaders, and is there whenever our folks call. And so after a long career in Montgomery, he's moved his family over here, and we're really pleased to have Chris here. Chris is going to share a little bit more about the Hyundai development.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. So a little bit, I think the real value that I can share with this panel is the story of how Hyundai chose the Bryan County site. I can kind of walk you through that, and then, of course, the big part of that's going to be economic incentives. So a little background on me. I came from Montgomery. I worked for Hyundai in Montgomery for 17 years, serving as general counsel there. I kind of picked up economic incentives and negotiations with the state, that skill set over the last couple of years. And so starting in December of 2021, Jose Munoz, our global chief operating officer, was composing a small group of Hyundai employees to do site selection. Because of my background with economic incentives, he asked me to join that team. And starting in January, we started the process of looking at different sites throughout the United States. I think it's very, very important to note that Hyundai, being the third largest car manufacturer in the world, is making decisions on not only what countries to make or to place its plants, but also where in those countries. And so once Jose was given the green light to look in the United States, our team quickly got to work. In January, our team visited numerous sites, precisely 13 sites in 7 states in just a couple of days. One of those sites was the Bryan County site. From there, in February, our top management and the engineering team visited several of the sites. At that point, we're starting to down select the different sites and kind of cross sites off our list. I will note it's highly, highly competitive. I would kind of describe it as a very intense competition. And with that, we got down from 13 sites. I think we got down to, at that point, 5 sites. And then in March, we then downgraded or deselected down to 4 sites. And Bryan County, of course, was one of those sites. Those 4 finalists came to Hyundai Motor America's office in California, made their presentations, and with those presentations, they actually gave their incentive offers as well. After that point, there were some rounds of negotiations, and then in April of last year, we notified Georgia that we had selected the Bryan County site. Ulrich, who is sitting to my left, works for KPMG, and Ulrich was a very, very key part of our team. Hyundai had hired KPMG to serve as our consultant through the whole process. They were with us during this first site selection tour in January. They were with us the whole process and are still with us today, helping with construction management as well. So looking back on it, I kind of see kind of big picture, why do we choose Bryan County? The first reason is the site itself. And without having the proper site, there's really it's just not going to be economically viable. So everything from the geotechnical aspects of it to the configuration, the transportation. Likewise, you want something very, very visible. So there's 4 miles of Interstate 16 visibility. That's really important to our brand. Beyond the site, reason number 2 would be the Savannah metropolitan area. In addition to having a great brand affinity, Savannah is just a great place to be and has all sorts of brand attractiveness. It's also wonderful when it comes to logistics, and so the Georgia Port Authority gives us huge logistical advantages, likewise all the interstates and the transportation as well, and including rail access. And then third is, part of that is the corporate peers as well, and so there's over 25 Fortune 500 companies located in the region. Of course, Gulfstream's one of those, and that was a big plus in our books of locating in Savannah. The third reason is the Georgia and local officials, and I was just telling Ulrich before this panel started that I think during the process, looking back in January, that's probably one of the areas I underestimated is how important it is to have a great team. The Georgia and the JDA have been absolutely fantastic and fantastic partners, and that goes beyond money nearly all the time. And so finding solutions when we have problems, being there and being supportive, and so it's really, really fantastic group of people. The fourth reason, the reason why we're here today, is economic incentives. And economic incentives are absolutely critical for Hyundai's decision, and I think probably most companies' decisions on where to locate. Going back to January of last year, when we were looking at what sites to visit, KPMG put together kind of a list of, 20, 25 or so sites. And of course, each of those sites were based on a number of factors, including what the economic incentives would probably look like, among other factors. And then as we kind of progressed through the process, going back to April of last year during the final presentations, again, economic incentives came up. And Tripp said it best. We had an interview with German Public Radio last week, and he said basically incentives, everything else gets you on the 1-yard line on a football field, incentives get you across the goal line. I would probably say it gets you on the 10-yard line, and then incentives helps you kind of punch it into the end zone. So it's certainly very, very important. And with that, it's I know companies really crave predictability and consistency and knowing what we're getting on the front end because we're running different business models to determine how profitable a facility is going to be, or even if it's economically viable. And so having that consistency and predictability is really, really key. So with that, again, I hope that's kind of helpful to understand, kind of, pull the curtain back a little bit and be very, very transparent with you guys of how we located and found Bryan County and chose Bryan County. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I guess I'll turn it over to Ulrich first.
Thanks, Chris. I want to just quickly pull out one of the points that Chris made there. I've heard economic development projects described as dating, and you're trying to look for the right match and the right mate. And I think Chris's point about that down selection process is really important. It's really more like being on The Bachelor, especially when it's an OEM, because you got this, shiny stud, or The Bachelorette, I guess. I don't watch those shows, but I hope you get my point. But you got this one, company that everybody's trying to woo, and there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? And so we got to get on the radar, obviously, to make that very first cut. But then it's really not about picking you; it's about not picking all the rest, right? And so every one of those steps in the process, we felt. The team felt great at every point because we had a previous relationship with the sister company in Kia and knew Chairman Chung and a lot of the team and Ulrich too that I'll introduce in a second. But really at each one of those stages, you can get cut, and once that happened, you get in the limo and you drive off and you don't get to play anymore. And so we were really fortunate to stay through the end and really find a great partner that's going to be here well past the 5 years, the job tax credits, when they are used up and they expire, and well past all of those incentives are gone. These guys are still going to be here making we're making the best planes in the world here. We're also going to be making the best vehicles. If you guys have been, particularly in a Genesis EV that is beating Tesla on all of the rankings and the ratings that are coming out, it's really a really special and unique vehicle. And so we're really proud to have them in our region. So the third member of our panel today is Ulrich Schmidt from KPMG. Ulrich has become a really good friend to Georgia. When I was at Economic Development in the mid-2000s, about a quarter of the projects that we worked had site selection consultants, and that is completely flipped now. We see about 3/4 of the projects that we have that are companies that are hiring a partner to evaluate the sites and the geotechnical and the incentives and all the workforce and all the different pieces that go into that. We keep Ulrich busy. He's here a lot. He's actually been here on some site visits the last couple of days, not here, but in Georgia. And that piece is something that we have really focused in on, developing relationships with the site selection consultants, making sure they know what sites we have, what our tax credit programs are, what our workforce looks like, what our educational system, what our transportation system, all those things that go into an analysis. And really pleased to have Ulrich here. And Ulrich's got this perspective that he doesn't just work in Georgia. He works all over the place, and is going to help us understand a little bit about that process and how we measure up. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. My name is Ulrich Schmidt. I'm a principal with KPMG's location analysis site selection practice. I've been with KPMG for 24 years. I'm based in Philadelphia. First of all, I'd like to thank the state of Georgia for sending the entire Georgia Bulldogs defensive line to the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see if it works out this year. It's going to be important. Thanks for inviting me. I'd like to offer some comments and some perspective around the overall process on site selection. So I'm what you would call a site selector. So if you've never seen one, they could look like me. Our work involves advising clients really in selecting locations for major investments. We work through a wide spectrum of industries. The background on the site selection process is usually it starts with figuring out a targeted geography. And that could be a state, it could be a couple states, it could be entire, East Coast, for example. And then we analyze locations that can meet a specific client's project demands. And those are many factors, as Chris has mentioned, supply chain, customers, suppliers, infrastructure, logistics, all figure into that overall location decision. And I'm talking about locations, not yet sites. Once these locations are filtered to the ones that are perceived to meet most of these project requirements, we actually get down to the sites, and we prepare a comparative cost analysis. So looking at all the different factors, a lot of times it's really workforce. Workforce is a key factor. How can that pipeline of 5 to 10,000 new jobs be met in a location? But also the site. Is the site ready for development? Can the site meet the project timeline? Projects are moving very fast these days, especially in the advanced manufacturing, automotive industry. Projects are moving at lightning speed and need sites that are essentially shovel-ready. So you need to have a site to compete. And that already takes some investment up front by the state and the community to make these sites really marketable. Oftentimes, that's your first incentive, to have a marketable site that has the infrastructure, the utilities, the road connections that can actually meet these aggressive timelines. The process then ends with the comparative cost analysis, so we look at all factors from labor cost, utility cost, one-time cost of acquiring a site, construction cost, to the tax environment. It's a recurring cost for companies to have, pay taxes and various taxes. And then incentives are essentially the offset to what that bottom line might look like. At that stage, you're looking typically at 2 to 3 sites that are competing. In this case, it was 4 finalist sites. Really, the construction-ready product, I would call the first incentive, but tax credits are important to help offset certain costs. So depending on the company, depending on the project, depending on the operation, various incentives could have various values depending on the industry. Not all companies are significant income tax payers, or maybe not initially. So income tax credits may or may not have a very direct impact. Usually they have an impact because they have a carry forward, and companies can then claim credits in the years where they actually have income tax liability. But there's sales tax, there's property tax, so really everything goes into that calculation of a bottom line operating comparison, operating cost comparison, and that ultimately gets offset by incentives. Companies, and Chris and Gulfstream have mentioned it both, compete globally. And I think that's a point that needs to be kept front and center. Companies have the option to invest in multiple locations. At least a lot of our clients have multiple operating locations in Asia and Europe, in the US. So it's not just a competition between states, it's a competition globally. And states and regions and countries also compete in this game. So you're not only competing with South Carolina or Alabama, you're competing with Mexico, Canada, Asia, Europe, and as we sit here, the European Union is developing some very aggressive incentives to attract the chip industry. And they've been successful. You've seen major announcements for Intel, you've seen announcements for Tesla in Germany, which is a high-cost operating location, but it happens. So it's a competition globally, and what companies are looking for is locations that can meet their operating environment really in all regards, from a overall labor perspective, operating cost perspective, supply chain perspective, but also cost perspective. When you look at individual programs, and I know that's somebody that's on everybody's mind, like I said, it depends on the industry, the company, the type of project. But typically, these incentives are a temporary savings. Companies need to do something to earn these incentives. So states build in safeguards. So do the Georgia incentive programs have safeguards built in that you need to do something first before you even earn the incentives. And if you don't do something, there are clawbacks. So there are actually mechanisms, if companies don't perform, that money can be clawed back. That is a good thing. So everybody's held accountable to their end of the bargain, and most states have these types of programs. And I would offer that, you know, the Georgia programs like the Georgia Job Tax Credit or the Mega Credit or the Quality Job Tax Credits are very effective because they can help offset tax cost. In the case of the Mega Credit, they can provide direct cash rebates to companies based on their withholding taxes that are being paid. But you need to meet certain requirements to qualify. So this is not just a free giveaway. You need to have certain salary levels. You need to have a certain size of a project to qualify for the Mega Credit to even be in the discussion. And that is, again, it's a good thing to have these types of requirements around some of the programs to make sure they really have the right effect and the right outcome. Now, looking at Georgia's program, or programs like the withholding tax credit, for example, which is very effective, Georgia's not the only state that has this program. So does Alabama, so does North Carolina, so does South Carolina. So, you know, programs are interesting at the front of this process where it's almost a marketing tool to get into the conversation. But in the end, they're really effective because they get evaluated to help offset costs, and it is truly a comparison of one location versus another. Not always is the case that the cheapest location wins. Like we said, multiple factors play a role here, but incentives can be the final kicker that brings a project to fruition. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thanks, Laurie. Back to you.
All right, we appreciate all the presentations, and we know this area is booming, and Georgia's doing a great job in that. You know, you talk about all the incentives, and you mentioned North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Of course, Florida and Tennessee have higher sales tax but don't have an income tax, so you're not going to need an income tax credit there. So tell me the thought process on that, if you could.
Yeah, I think states have done a good job to adjust their programs and their tools to their specific environment. If states have low income tax, for example, they're typically looking to offset other taxes. They might increase some of their cash programs. They might increase, other contributions to a project. But I believe it takes both. It takes a competitive tax environment, and it takes some incentives or the right tools that can be combined to address a company's need. Like I said, companies oftentimes don't necessarily have income tax to begin with, or it takes them 4, 5, 6 years to ramp up before they even generate a tax liability. In that case, other programs are more effective. So states have figured out that there's not one-size-fits-all approach, either low tax environment or incentives. It's usually a combination of both to make locations attractive.
And after I said that, I remembered that Florida does have a corporate income tax of 5.5, so that would be a factor there. So we had an audit done of the, we send out through fiscal audits, and we're hands off of it, of the job tax credit. And their analysis was that, they had a lot more jobs than the direct jobs and all that. But in the end, they believe that only a small fraction of those jobs would have come, were a direct result of the job tax credit, that most of them would have come anyway. And so that's the hard part, I know, for you guys, for us, is, how do we decide that kind of thing as a state? And
Chairman,
then,
if I can jump in real quick on that.
Well, if I could
Yep.
add to it before you do that too, we'll have maybe 10 different credits, and the way each group's report comes out, their one credit is solely responsible for everything that happened and measure anything you get against it. So if you could address
Yeah,
that.
and that was going to be my point. I mean, I think unless you talk to each company that located and ask them on their matrix what was the deciding factor, and I think Ulrich said it. I mean, there's never one. And so, if you want to take one tax credit and say, well, they would have happened anyway without the jobs tax credit, well, I mean, you also have the other programs that build the case. And by the way, investment in transportation and education is also an incentive, right? I mean, the fact that we have a transportation system that they can use, that we have a port system that's the best around, that we've got an education system and a higher ed system. So all those things are you can think about those as incentives as well, because it all plays to part of the story. So unless you went and talked to each company and said, would you have come here if not for the job tax credit? I mean, maybe because of all the other things too, right? And so it's a whole package together that they make the decision, or they might not have, because maybe not having that one program, we wouldn't have got across, the 1 yard line in the metaphor earlier. And so, I don't know how you would do that and how you would say that with any confidence without having the companies themselves tell you, yeah, this was the factor, that led to our decision or not to our decision. And I don't think it's ever one factor that does it.
I mean, that would,
I think what Bert said is absolutely right. It's the whole package, it's the environment, it's the stable environment. When Gulfstream looks at adding capacity, we do look at a number of things in the tax environment, especially as Mark mentioned, the stable, consistent approach to that is incredibly important. So, a real example, prior to the sales tax exemption on MRO here in Georgia, we had an opportunity to add capacity to maintenance, and we really wanted it in Georgia. We worked with our parent company, General Dynamics, but at the time, the business case made sense for us to put that MRO facility in Massachusetts. And after that decision was made, the sales tax exemption here in Georgia was put into place, and a few years later, the sunset was removed. And since that time, we have built so much capacity here in Georgia for the maintenance program, as I mentioned earlier, that there's more maintenance done here than any other place in the world. So it is a kind of case-by-case, expansion consideration.
and one other thing too, in Bartow County, with the SK plant coming there and with Q-Cells between Representative Carpenter's district and Bartow getting about, I think they're splitting that about 50-50. Anyway, the local government there, because of 75 and because it's booming, their opinion is they're coming anyway. And so they're getting their, the property taxes right off the bat. And because of that, they're looking at close to a 50% increase in their digest. But they also say, you get something that's massive, we've got costs to pay. And otherwise it's on the backs of the other local taxpayers to pay for it. So these, I know, are well, I don't know for sure because I don't have access, but they appear to be projects of regional significance. And I know that has to be hush-hush, and I understand why, but it's just hard for us to get a grasp on, what is needed and what isn't needed in that.
Yeah, and I think that's the brilliance of the Georgia system, right? I mean, each local entity can decide what makes sense for their community. We've sat in meetings with local governments that have put abatement schedules on the table that we didn't. I won't say we didn't agree with, but we were surprised that they were so generous. But that's a local elected official, a local economic developer. They're making that decision, local development authority deciding what they want in their community. And if that's the decision in Bartow and that works for them, then that's terrific. That's great. And other communities are more. I would tell you that a lot of rural communities that we work in, they don't have a problem, giving up a little bit in order to get jobs so that their people don't have to leave the county that they live in to work. They can stay closer to home. And I think this whole rural economic development push that we've seen, we've allowed the communities to decide for themselves, what they wanted to do in terms of partnering with a company and bringing them in. And each project's different. I mean, you're working with them, you're seeing the numbers, and you have to kind of put your best foot forward. But always there's an analysis of, is this going to be worth it for our community, and if not, and we do that at the state level too. I mean, I hope nobody ever thinks that there's no recognition of what the cost is to the state and to a local government when these things are made. I mean, there's a lot of analysis done to make sure that we're getting a return and that the project's going to be beneficial for both our state and for our local community.
I was going to. This question or thought could be for bachelor number 1, 2, or 3. But I think when you look at tax exemption and tax credits, you have to look at the halo effect that it has as it moves just beyond just the direct give and take but how it affects the community, lumber, electricians, et cetera. Something that I think the least favorite Bennett talked about.
I'll let these guys talk, but Dr. Toma, spoke to that too, right? I mean, I think that's so important to recognize and understand that it's really the generating factor, right? To your point, it's not just the jobs at the plant, but it's all the small businesses that come along beside and provide services to the project, and really, that's where we rely on our friends in the economist world to help us understand that and know what that looks like. But I can tell you, I mean, we've seen some of the numbers with the Gulfstream, employees and how they're spread out, not just here and not just in Brunswick, but literally all over the state. And Jamie talked about the ports earlier. I mean, the impact is even far beyond just us locally.
Yeah, that's right, Senator. The supplier relationships with Gulfstream is far-reaching. Effingham County, for example, is the largest privately owned company in Effingham County is a Gulfstream supplier. It's Edwards Interiors. So we see that happen all the time. But there's also some large companies who've relocated to Savannah. So most recently, CAE, which is a Canadian company, they relocated or actually built a new facility here to support Gulfstream. CAE conducts flight training for Gulfstream pilots and mechanics and flight attendants. So you look at those jobs, but you also look at those pilots are coming from all over the world to come into Savannah for 6 to 8 weeks at a time every year to be certified as a pilot. So they're staying in local hotels, eating at local restaurants for 6 to 8 weeks. And that requires every year. Those pilots who fly Gulfstream have to be certified every year, and they like coming to Savannah. Another example is on the aircraft, it's a Rolls-Royce engine. So if you go out by the airport, you'll see a new Rolls-Royce facility that was built in Savannah because of Gulfstream, and we dropped the engines from a Gulfstream, carted across the street, and they rebuilt those engines there. So it is a far-reaching opportunity or halo effect when you look at suppliers, especially aerospace suppliers and other high-tech manufacturing.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm not sure if this is working or not. Thank you for the panel. Very, very informative. I think what we've talked about in the past is it's kind of an art and a science when you're measuring this, right? It's not simple just to put the numbers together with the halo effect. I do, though, want to give a quick prop to our Department of Audits. They do include a halo effect when they do these reports. So whether it be the folks on the committee or in the audience today, they have taken time to put that in there. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just a statement sort of in the form of question. That seems to be the way we're going this morning. I get it. If somebody gives you more to come, you're going to come there. What I think we see here and what the businesses that have been around and been investing in Georgia for hundreds of years see, and I'm just going to be honest, I don't mean to dampen this, but I want to be honest about it, is Hyundai came here for those incentives. Tell me how much it mattered to them that 3 and 4 were coming online down in Augusta, those 2 nuclear plants. And you weren't going to build in Texas where they have an unregulated electric market, and it gets really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter, and you have rain. So looking at that, we're focused on tax credits here, but I mean, I think Georgia has a lot more to offer when you're lining it up. If it comes down, you're just picking us because we're spending more money there, then we're not getting credit for the people that have built the state, for the last 200 years, and the investments that Georgia Power's made and our ratepayers have made in doing that. So it sets me back a little bit. So tell me how much that meant in the decision for Hyundai, the fact you knew you were going to have reliable, clean, reliable, and affordable energy.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was a number of factors why we chose Georgia. Economic incentives was kind of one of the 4 that I mentioned. And to be perfectly honest with you, Georgia did not offer the best incentives. Now, they were within the ballpark, but they weren't the best incentives. And so Hyundai did not go chasing after the dollar, so to speak, in its decision on where to locate. Utility was a major component as well. Utility cost. I recall KPMG doing an analysis of how much energy cost, and with our facility, obviously, we're going to be Georgia Power's probably one of their bigger customers, and so. But absolutely, you're exactly correct. I think energy, reliability as well. That was also another factor we looked at. So yes, sir, you're exactly correct on that.
That's fine. I just wanted to thank you for doing that. That's the line driving you down to the 10-yard line with our businesses that have been here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that fact that it's not all about credits.
Absolutely, and I'll add in there too, Georgia Power has been a fantastic partner through this project. They were, ahead of schedule. They've been fantastic to work with on the construction side and been a fantastic partner.
Hang on to that microphone. I've got a question because I feel like I've done just a hair bit of research, but I'm not fully educated on the process. But I seem to recall that Georgia was not the low-cost provider of incentives in this deal, that Tennessee, we left, they were actually came in much, much more aggressive than we did, but we were still able to land the project because of the port and electrical concerns, et cetera. Is that correct? Can a poker player say, tell us in now?
No, you're correct. As I mentioned just a second ago, Georgia was did not offer us the most incentives, and but again, it was within the ballpark is where I'd probably put it. If it was grossly under everyone else, then we would not be in Georgia. But there's a number of factors, and I really do think it's because of the. I think the really good vision of our leadership to realize it's more than just the initial money, it's also relationships, and that's kind of touched on earlier, having the great relationships with Commissioner Wilson, the local officials as well. I mentioned earlier the Savannah metropolitan area, likewise the site itself, and so, but again, I think it's incentives kind of using the football analogy kind of helps you kind of punch it into the end zone.
Sure, but I think as legislators, that's what we want to hear, right? We want to hear that Georgia's competitive, but we also don't want to feel like we're the person that has to take them out to the nicest restaurant to get her to go out with us, right? Yeah. Every now and then we want to be able to pull through Chick-fil-A drive-thru and make her happy. And then I've got a that's great. I've got a question for Mr. Gulfstream. There's a lot of conversation on the R&D tax credit. I'm obviously a big fan of it because I think that it invests into the future, and you can't monetize that R&D investment on what it's going to do for your business, your existing businesses. And so I see it as an incentive for our existing businesses to grow. And I would just like for you to talk a little bit more about how Gulfstream looks at an investment in R&D today, and how do you extrapolate that? Is it a 5-year window, 10-year window? How do your models work on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The innovation of Gulfstream is what sells aircraft. So it's a continuous investment in R&D facilities. It takes about 10 years from the time an engineer first kind of draws out a product until a customer receives the first aircraft. So it's a pretty time-consuming process. It's a reoccurring process. We have 3 aircraft currently in some phase of R&D. So if you keep up with aerospace, you probably have read about the G700. We're hoping to get certification from the FAA this year and start delivering that aircraft to customers. One right behind that is the G800. We'll be coming behind that, and then a couple of years now is the G400. And those are the products that we have announced publicly. Those of you who've toured Gulfstream, you've noticed the black curtains that I don't talk about. Kind of what we have announced is behind that curtain. It's a very competitive industry. As I mentioned earlier, our competitors are the Brazilians, the Canadians, and the French. They would love to know what we do on the R&D timeline. We're typically about a generation ahead of those other competitors because we're constantly reinvesting in the R&D life cycle. And Georgia's a good place. You guys have invested heavily in supporting up that R&D landscape. I mentioned the Georgia Southern University College of Engineering, a great school. They're producing great Georgia graduates who grew up in Georgia. They want to stay in Georgia. We're very effective at recruiting those students. The new College of Engineering at UGA, similar situation. The dean there is doing a great job. We have a great landscape in Georgia to continue pushing this as a high-tech area, and aerospace is a part of that.
Yeah, and I'll quickly add to the right and honorable chairman from Dalton's point. We are almost never the most aggressive on incentives. I mean, I say almost because we may have in a very rural part of the state got really aggressive because we were trying to drive job creation in an area that had not seen it lately. But, almost always. And the incentive programs are very different. Other states write checks. I mean, they literally just write a check out of their budget to a company for them to use sort of however they want. The vast majority of our incentives are tax credit based, as Ulrich mentioned, where you have to do something in order to qualify, in order to get it. It's not a cash outlay that comes straight out. It's savings on future taxes. And when you see those numbers that get reported in the media about what the incentive package is, you always have to remember that's a maximum they could qualify for, right? I mean, a lot of times companies are not able to fully qualify for every piece of the package, and that's up to them to analyze and see what's actually attainable for them. But what our role is to give them sort of, here's all the things that you could do. They'll work with their accountants and their consultants. They'll figure out which programs they qualify for and which ones they don't. But ultimately, our job is to say, here are the different programs that the state has, and here's all the ones that you could potentially qualify for. And so that number that gets reported in the offer letter, is most likely not the actual number that the company will end up qualifying for. But they are able to do that analysis, and they know that. And so we're not writing a check out of the Treasury. We're not giving cash out to companies, which a lot of states do. Ours, for the most part, unless it's an investment in infrastructure, whether it's a water sewer system or whether it's a new interchange or a training facility, something like that. Other than that, it is all based on your performance, either investing or creating jobs or doing R&D or whatever the program specifically incentivizes.
I hadn't really thought about the best way to ask this question, so I'm going to stumble through it a little bit. Maybe y'all can help me out. But for Bert and for Ulrich, do we, when you start saying that, like a Hyundai or a Gulfstream, and they're out there in the market, I mean, do you have a pool of all these different international and domestic sites, or all 50 states? Or do you kind of end up with a top 12 that you roll down and, I would think Georgia is, over time, has worked itself maybe up into that short list, if you will. And then I guess shifting to Bert a little bit, you've been in a long time. I mean, what have you seen where, when we, we're at a point where we could, just wanted anything we could get, and now we're at a point where, maybe we are more selective or can be more selective along those lines. And then I was going to ask Chris if he'd go down that list of A, B, C, D again, if he would, before we leave.
And so I think you're asking kind of two different questions, and I'll let Ulrich give his perspective. But there's the site question is a separate one that I'll take care in a second. Are you a stable and business environment? Do you have good leadership? Are you a place that welcomes investment? All those things, that kind of gets you a reputation around amongst Ulrich's colleagues about, are these folks easy to work with? Can they do a project? Because ultimately they need to land the project for their client, right? And so that was a real push that we started making really, I'd say, in the mid-2000s, and we continued that for 20 years, really putting a focus on making sure those guys know that we are open for business, to your point, that we're ready to work with them and partner with them and figure out a way to solve the problems that they face when they land a project. The site question is a totally different question. We have historically not had the sites that other states have invested heavily in site programs. And when you go to these conferences with the site selectors, they can tell you, oh, it's the mega site over in Huntsville, or it's the mega site in Memphis, and they get known, these sites get known. The Bryan County site is really, an interesting story. If you guys haven't heard it, I won't tell the whole thing, but we had the site in Pooler for 20 plus years. Mercedes-Benz Smyrna project didn't end up didn't happen. So we had that site sitting there in the mid-2000s. We put Mitsubishi heavy equipment over there to take about, a third of the site, quarter of the site. And so we had that sitting over there for 20 years. It came in second a bunch, and Tripp's going to break into hives in a second, but it came in second place a bunch. And the local folks came to us and said, the site's not big enough. For the big projects, the OEMs, 450 acres or whatever the remaining site was not big enough. And so we had a project with Amazon that we were working, and Amazon bought that property from us. And so for $60+ million, Amazon bought that property from the state, which we used to partner with the locals to go and buy that Bryan County site, which was almost ready to be developed into distribution. And we were not going to have that on our site list. And so virtually all the sites that we have are privately owned. A few are locally owned, a few local governments have put in the investment to own their sites, but we don't have, we are short in terms of sites, and we have been, for years. And so all the work that's happened, all the projects that we've landed have been because our local partners have either invested in sites or we've had, private partners that we've been able to work with and market essentially their site, and then the companies come and look at it. So kind of two different questions. I would say we're ahead of the game in terms of these great relationships with consultants and making sure that our programs are well known, and we're a great state to do business. I would tell you, I think the economic developers in the room would tell you that we have lagged in terms of having sites that are publicly owned. The speed to market piece for Hyundai was large part because we didn't have to go buy a site. We had it. We had it owned. We were able to turn that, and they were able to start to work very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think to the point of, is there a top 10 list that is always being submitted? I would say it depends on the project, and really depends on the industry. If you think back, to really stick with the automotive industry here for a second, there was no automotive industry in the Southeast. Mercedes in Alabama was probably the first investment, and collectively, the southeastern states have been very successful in building an automotive industry, an automotive cluster, compared to what Detroit and Ohio and Kentucky might have been in the past. So, for automotive projects, you look at places that have the right operating environment, the right cost structure, the cluster of the industry, the workforce with the experience, the shovel-ready, ready-to-go sites, and back to the point that was made before, I think one factor was really speed to market. Can we get to market? Some things money can't fix, right? It doesn't matter if you throw another $10 million at this problem. If it takes another year to get the power to the site, that might be the death knell for that site. So I think it's a number of factors, and we work a lot on experience, right? Where have companies been successful? Where have clients been successful? Where do we know all those factors exist in terms of the good operating environment, including the costs and taxes? And that's the starting point. And that might be a list of 8, 10, 12 states that then quickly gets filtered down to the ones that get in-person site visits, where everything is really checked on the ground to make sure that, everything is really the way the data shows.
All right, well, that's,
I think you wanted Chris to run through the four.
I think he's done it twice. I was going to ask him to do it one more time, so if it's redundant, I apologize. But yeah,
Can I just add something real quick? Because I will kind of reinforce what Ulrich said. We were one of our top 4 finalists. The major knock on the site, and one of the major reasons we didn't choose it was not ready for another year or so. And speed to market was absolutely critical to our project. And so we just had to pass it over. That was kind of the death knell for that project, so to speak. So yeah, so site ready, shovel ready is really, really key.
well, we're just a few minutes behind, but doing pretty good, so we appreciate you being here. I do want to add one thing. We were, in the Senate and the House, we have kickball games, we have rodeos we compete in. We were at the simulator yesterday, and now while the Senate did have to take a second pass to land the plane, came into it the first time, the House did make it back to the runway where they crashed and burned. I think maybe forgot to get the nose up. I really don't know. I wasn't watching that close. But anyway, and our ace pilot, Chairman Tillery, still needs to do it at some point as he flies around. We certainly appreciate the presentation, and we're going to move on to the next phase, and thanks for all the information. On this next one, we had, the college had run a test, and we thought we had, it was going to be on the screen, and now they're having a technical problem with it. So if you want to make sure everybody on their phone or laptop that has a link can do this, Keenan, after we get started. I know you set my phone up for it. And I guess if you communicated with him, is he ready? There he is, but we won't be able to hear him, I don't think.
We're working on that right now.
Okay.
We're doing audio tests.
Chairman, while we're working on it, I do think a couple of more, we had Representative Westbrook, I believe, walked in, and I believe one of your senators did want to recognize Senator Mallow for being here, both.
Okay, great.
Representative Westbrook still here, or did I?
Oh, there you are, I'm sorry. Good to have you.
I just might need complete silence from everybody.
Okay, let me,
Mr. Hederman, can you speak for me, please?
Can you hear me now, Ken?
Again, so this is the technical issue with the room that we're dealing with. That's as loud as it goes on the computer here. So I might just put a microphone next to Senator Hofstetler's computer.
well, either way, okay.
I will try to
Let me-
raise my voice and speak loud. How's that?
That's perfect.
Perfect, excellent. All right.
It's not perfect, but it'll have to do. Thank you, guys.
All right, well, Chairman Hofstetler, Chairman Shawla, Georgia, thank y'all for having me, especially somebody from Big Ten country speaking to Georgia this time of year. My name is Ray Fetterman. I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Research Center at the Buckeye Institute in Columbus, Ohio. We're a think tank that specializes in economic research, analyzing the impact of public policy in Ohio and several other states. I've been working on tax policy for almost 30 years at both the state, local, and federal level. What I'd like to do today for my remarks is discuss the gold standard of tax policy, drawing from economic research that spans decades. Economists at the Organization for Economic Community Development, the OECD, said taxes need to be set up to minimize taxpayers' compliance costs and government administrative costs while also avoiding tax avoidance and evasion. Taxes affect the decisions of households to save, supply labor, invest in human capital, the decisions of firms to produce, create jobs, invest and innovate, as well as the choice of savings channels and assets by investors. The gold standard of tax policy should adhere to the following principles. It should be simple, transparent, pro-growth, and fair/neutral. A simple tax policy is easy for taxpayers to understand and for government to administer and enforce. The more credits and deductions in a tax code, the more confusing it is. A more generous standard deduction, for example, is better than many itemized deductions. Time spent by individuals, firms, and businesses filling out tax returns is time spent away from families and growing the business. So first, congratulations to Georgia on your tax reforms of last year, making your state individual tax code much more simple and efficient. The good tax code is also transparent. Transparency means taxpayers should be easily able to gather information about taxes they pay directly or indirectly, why those taxes are in place, how much revenue those taxes collect from whom, and how those tax dollars are used. A tax system should be pro-growth and to provide the least impediment to economic prosperity as possible. This means a broader-based tax system with low rates is better than a narrow-based with high tax rates. And finally, what I want to spend the bulk of my time on is discussing the principle of being fair and neutral. Essentially, government should not pick winners and losers. Taxes should not reward or discourage different industries or businesses. A tax preference is specific tax credits that can go to different regions, different companies, and or firms or individuals that engage in specific economic activity. Economists, political science, and other academics have long studied the impact of tax preferences. The evidence is clear that on average, using tax preference is an inefficient use of tax resources and does not produce results that policymakers hope to achieve. Additional economic activity is costly, especially on the margin, because much of the economic activity would have occurred even without tax preferences. In short, most business activity would occur without tax preferences for reasons other than fiscal policy. First, consider what the research says on tax preferences. Overall tax preference is essentially government spending through the tax code. Government is allowing specific industry, regions, cities, or people to pay less in tax in return for behaviors or investment. On average, and during a normal business cycle, the return on government spending is less than $1. That means for every dollar the government spends, the return on that spending is below $1, resulting in a This means roughly about 90% of subsidy spending is wasted because that economic activity would have occurred regardless of the tax preference. So for example, here in Columbus, when Intel announced that they were going to build their new chip plant in a nearby location in the Columbus metropolitan area, Intel said they would have moved to Columbus regardless of the tax incentive package Ohio put together. Other factors are least or more important than tax incentives. These include, for example, in the Intel decision, access to a major airport, access to a major metropolitan area with education centers, more affordable natural resources from land to water to energy, and finally, quality of life, all played an important part in making Intel to decide to locate in Columbus. Tax credits that go to an activity that were already going to happen is called what we call kind of buying the base. That means essentially what you're doing is you're spending government resources on an activity that was already going to take place, but raises the cost of any additional marginal job or economic activity. Other research shows that tax preferences are also inefficient because they change how dollars flow in the economy. They give money to companies that are protected from competition that can encourage less efficient production. They can motivate investment and production decisions that are suboptimal and would not have been decided in a fair market. Other companies then may decide to pursue political favors and profits rather than focus on their core businesses. And finally, research has found that in many cases of economic incentive packages, companies fail to live up to their promises, producing fewer jobs and other forms of tax revenue. On specific tax expenditures, for example, it is not surprising that researchers in Princeton and other universities have found that direct subsidies can increase jobs in the subsidized firms or areas. Again, this is not a surprise because the government is directing a lot of money to these specific areas or firms. So then the question is, why then do tax expenditures found to be less cost-effective if some areas and firms benefit? Well, the reason is we talk about the seen and unseen. Frederick Bastiat says it's easier to see what is happening directly in front of you, and it is harder to see the unseen. In this case, it's easier to see the results of companies and areas that receive special tax treatment. It is harder to see the impact on areas in industries that must pay more in taxes for these subsidies. To a large extent, tax expenditures are taxing Peter to pay for Paul. Unlike the federal government, state governments have a balanced budget constraint, and you must raise tax revenue to pay for government services. If you're using tax preferences to subsidize economic activity, that is foregone tax revenue and needs to be made up elsewhere. Thus, other industries, individuals, and taxpayers will be paying more as a result to pay for these tax expenditures. Too often, studies that evaluate the return on tax preferences only look at the benefit of lower taxes and government spending, and they do not look at the impact of higher taxes on other areas of businesses. So again, for example, here in Columbus, we've had a lot of people moving to Intel, people touting about how good it is for the Columbus region, which is true, it has been good for Columbus, but what is good for Columbus does not necessarily mean it is good for the state of Ohio, as many of the people coming to seek jobs here have come from other parts of the state. That essentially that Columbus is cannibalizing economic activity that might have occurred in less fortunate areas such as the southeast Appalachian area or northeast area that has been hit hard by the change of manufacturing switching to a service and information economy, which is cities like northeast Cleveland, Youngstown, Ohio, that has continually lost population. If you're going to look at evidence on the return on tax preferences, a good economic analysis will not only look at the benefits, but also look at the costs. There is no magic money tree at the state level that can pay for these tax preferences and tax treatments without raising revenue or reducing spending in some other area. Other problems with state-specific tax preferences is that sometimes advantages accrue to people and businesses living outside the state. Investors, business owners, and even some workers may benefit from a subsidized firm or taxes to the state of Georgia, resulting in a higher debt rate loss. Research has found this is particularly true in areas where it is easy to move across state or county or even national lines. Tax preferences also tend to reward large businesses and existing firms compared to smaller firms and entrepreneurs. Essentially, larger businesses have more accountants, bigger staff, and more knowledge of how to take advantage of the policy process and the tax code compared to startup businesses and people with less expertise. So overall, lower tax rates is best for economic growth. Investments flow to what the market thinks that is best and has the best return on capital. New industries, particularly smaller businesses and entrepreneurs, will be allowed to flourish and thrive. The more tax preferences in place, the higher the tax rate is then needed to produce the needed amount of tax revenue. So this has created a vicious cycle for other states, where it has higher overall state tax rates, then require higher tax preferences for business to pursue that economic activity. My analysis is that Georgia benefits from an overall low tax environment, so you don't have to worry about that as much as other states that have a higher tax on capital and corporations. In those states, we have seen that businesses simply do not expand without significant tax investments, and newer industries are throttled into growth and will relocate to areas with lower taxes overall. So in my remarks, I had discussed basically, what the literature has found on the overall average impact of studies on tax preferences. Yes, some tax preference projects can be successful and create some economic growth. Just like in football, sometimes a Hail Mary pass can result in a touchdown. But an offensive game plan that relies too much on Hail Marys is not going to be successful. Just like any economic development plan relies on continued use of tax preferences is not going to create sustained prosperity. For economic development, using dollars for core government services such as better education and infrastructure is a better route than using tax preferences. Companies want educated workers. Being able to make sure that Georgia is producing talented workforce that meets the needs of modern companies will benefit all companies instead of just a few. When engaging in tax preferences, finally, you need to make sure that there is good oversight and accountability. Some of my fellow panelists have remarked on the importance of clawbacks. It is important that the state of Georgia has made sure that you have real benchmarks with clawbacks that are enforced and good legislative oversight of tax preferences. This is to ensure that taxpayers are getting the best use of the dollars. Any economic analysis and academic analysis that looks at the benefit of tax preferences must be a real evaluation. It cannot simply look at the benefits, but it also must look at the cost of this program. Again, these dollars are oftentimes zero-sum, where tax dollars taken away from one area to give to a tax preference to another necessarily requires less economic activity in the industry or region that is higher taxed. Dr. Timothy Bartik, who literally wrote the book on tax preferences at the state level, again concludes that overall tax preferences have failed to live up to the promised expectations, and a dollar spent on tax preferences tends to generate less than $1 economic opportunity. So again, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Hopefully you can, maybe some feedback.
Yeah, if you have your mic on, we're gonna get feedback. So I recommend turning off your microphone, and we can get a 30-second delay via the stream, or you can chat your question. It's not our system, so I don't know how to do that. But you just might mute yourself on your computer. So we can type the questions to him in the chat.
Okay, I know he's worked with several states on reducing about $6 billion, and I know that's more than just tax credits, so maybe he could go through that.
Okay.
Glad you're
Senator, you wanted to ask a question about, how we work with other tax credits in other states. So, a lot of times, like Georgia, states have recognized that states compete on tax policy. Businesses and individuals want to locate to places that are more attractive for economic opportunity investment. These are states with lower tax rates, lower cost of living. So a lot of times the question policymakers have is, how do we get to lower rates? And the answer is getting rid of, a lot of times, specific tax preferences and tax credits. We've been able to work with the state of Iowa, for example, on helping them move to a flat tax, like Georgia, identifying specific tax expenditures, both on the individual and corporate side, we felt that were particularly ineffective. We gave them recommendations totaling hundreds of millions of dollars that allow them to have some of the capacity to move to a flat tax regime. We're currently in the process of starting a new economic analysis in Iowa so they can move to a flat tax faster than the original schedule, so they can go ahead and hit the revenue and tax triggers well ahead of time so they can reap those benefits. We've also looked, for example, worked with the state of Louisiana, taking a look at their tax regime as well, giving them specific suggestions on how they can pay for some of their tax reform. Particularly, for example, Louisiana had a franchise tax, taxing the property and wealth of businesses. This is particularly egregious, and so we were able to speed up and help eliminate the Louisiana franchise tax. And again, we gave them specific targeted tax credits we found that were inefficient for the state of Louisiana. So overall, and not just in those states, but in many others, we've seen a great deal of acceleration where states moving towards a more broad-based, low tax rate state, for example, paid for both by eliminating tax preferences and also states taking advantage of the fact that many states are running record budget surpluses. Yes, so I am not an expert, as not on the part of airplane craft maintenance on the state of Georgia, for example. I would be, actually, my expertise is more kind of looking at the overall use of tax expenditures and tax preferences. And again, I think, the evidence shows that there are other factors of fiscal policy that play at least as an important role. And I guess the question then becomes is kind of thinking through what type of economic activity that would occur about this exemption. And so that would be my concern. So the mechanics of our analysis, yes, so I guess basically we use micro models. So my original start of the career was starting in federal policy, where federal policymakers moved to what we call dynamic scoring analysis. This is back in the 90s. At the time, for example, a lot of federal government policymakers only used scoring, these multipliers to look at the impact of economic analysis. Dynamic scoring takes into effect a more complete analysis, saying when you lower tax rates, you may get more economic activity by individuals and firms, takes into account the size of the equation. So we're able to pioneer major federal models Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It was a pleasure. Feel free to share my email, and I'll be glad to provide any sources for any remarks here today for people interested in more information on what the academic research shows. I'm happy to provide that to the chairman of the committee. Thank you.
Well, again, sorry for the difficulties here. They had tested that out and thought we had a good system, but it was good to have his testimony anyway. So I think we've got our last panelist here. Yeah, great. If you want to go on up with Stacy with the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute.
Chairman, I won't take but just a minute, but we talked about last time that we were going to have a website and upload some of the materials from the first meeting, and going to continue to do that, and I guess put forward where the future meetings are. But we also have an email established if somebody wants to send in testimony outside of these meetings. It's taxpaneltestimonial@house.ga.gov, and we'll work on making sure we get that out to anybody that may want to use that.
And I believe both this meeting as well as a recording of Dr. Heterman will be available on the Senate House webpage. All right.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank y'all for the opportunity to speak today. I know we're on a little bit of time squeeze, so I'll fast forward. You do have a copy of our slides. I will not get through them all today, but you have them for your reference. My name is Stacy Fox. I'm the president and CEO at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. I am a Georgia native. My parents built the house right off Moody Road, Chairman Blackman. So a hometown, and I may not have an SCC ring like our Lieutenant Governor, but I do have a plaque in the Student Center as a founding member of the Arch Society at the University of Georgia. So I'm proud Georgia native, and I'm very committed to what we do here. If you're unfamiliar with GBPI, we work really at the intersection of research and advocacy, really to inform debate, inform decision-making, inform y'all's decision-making, to advance our vision of a state where all Georgians prosper. And you likely know that we have a team of experts when it comes to the Georgia budget, state fiscal policy, and specific areas of state expenditure like education and healthcare. We are a strong proponent of a fair and equitable tax system. After all, taxes are for everyone. They pay for things we all share. And we'll have a lot to say, as you can imagine, this fall as you travel the state and do your work. But we're really thankful to be here today and really want to focus on the work that needs to happen around the tax code in Georgia and amplify a little bit of Mr. Hederman's comments around transparency. But we look forward to sharing our analysis, research, and recommendations as our process goes through this fall. I think really the bottom line that we want to share today at GBPI is that we believe that Georgians deserve to know where their money is going. And we heard a lot today about a best state to do business in, and that's really important, but it's also important that our residents are thriving. Both need to be true, and they simply aren't right now. We have, for example, 1 million Georgia residents that are food insecure. So we want to make sure that both are true in the state. And part of that is making sure that we get a good ROI on our tax incentives and programs throughout the state. I do want to share, and I can fast forward to this slide, I think, to just give you a visual here. Unfortunately, this is not where we're succeeding in Georgia. In fact, Georgia ranks 50th among the states as far as transparency related to information and state disclosures on who gets and how we use our tax incentives and tax credits. And that's really what I want to focus on today. Y'all are familiar with Senate Bill 6 that passed in 2021 that allows for a limited review of 10 tax credits per year that can be split between the House and Senate committees. But even those limited number of tax credit reviews have produced reports that say we don't have enough information to produce a full evaluative process of those limited tax credits. So we need to be doing a little bit more there, and wanted to talk about some recommendations around that today. Most states have provisions that require or incentivize hiring residents over non-residents to qualify for tax credits. We don't have that in Georgia. Most states, in fact, 87% of states in this country cap large-scale incentive programs. Georgia does not. Most states permit disclosure of individual companies or projects receiving tax credits, but Georgia does not. And these, what's happening around the country is part of what we use at GBPI to inform the recommendations I'm going to share with you today. And establishing really a robust, regular review of the full tax credit system in Georgia is really your fiduciary responsibility. So that's why we wanted to provide you with some solutions to make that happen. We also, this is happening all around us as well, so just wanted to share with you that our neighboring states have adopted tax review cycles in which credits must be evaluated, all credits must be evaluated, including 3 years in our neighboring state of Georgia and 4 years in Tennessee and Alabama. South Carolina also recently just started disclosing company names and award values.
Hey, can I add something quick? You said Georgia.
Yeah.
I think you meant another state.
Did I? Oh, Tennessee and Alabama, maybe.
Okay.
I'm so Georgia-centered. It's hard to say.
What about Florida?
Oh, Florida's 3 years. Tennessee and Alabama does that review every 4 years. Thank you for that correction, Mr. Chairman. South Carolina also recently started disclosing company names, award values, and new jobs counts for its incentive programs, and Alabama recently enacted legislation to require the State Department of Commerce to disclose online names of companies that receive economic development incentives. So let me just go back and share with you a little bit about our recommendations around transparency. Our first recommendation really is to enact a regular review cycle of the entire tax credit. And the General Assembly could appoint a permanent tax review committee that would provide an annual report to the body. And in 2021, we actually published some recommendations of what the outcome of that annual report could look like. What are some of those pieces of that report? We also would like to recommend annual disclosures of recipients of tax credits and incentives across the state, including information on jobs created, especially wages. We heard a little bit about that earlier today. Talking about wages is really important, and disaggregating that data. Our last 4 recommendations include a sunset, adding a sunset to all of our tax credits in state. You remember that even Dr. Dorfman mentioned that when he spoke to this body earlier this year. It is important that every tax credit that we put in place in the state has some type of sunset, so it is not just continuing into infinity without legislative review. We'd also like to see an automatic state audit on any tax credit over $1 million. That's happening, as I mentioned, in over 75% of states across this country, and Georgia's not doing that. Also, requiring in-state residency for all tax credits issued is really important. I think you probably know that a majority of the job tax credits that you issue from the state go to out-of-state workers. Only about 19% go to in-state workers. And so we want to, Senator Tiller, you were talking about this, about incentivizing, helping those in Georgia get jobs and get good jobs. And I think we want to make sure that's happening with the tax credits that we're handing out. We also want to encourage y'all to think about requiring public reporting on total number of transferable credits. This is a large issue in Georgia. A lot of these large companies are selling their tax credits on the open market, and we don't have visibility into that, and we should in the state, and we would encourage y'all to think about requiring a report on that annually. And I think the last thing I just want to share with y'all is, really, I think from our perspective at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, transparency is really the floor, not the ceiling here, when we talk about building a fair and equitable tax system in the state. And, transparency really just demands that our residents know where their money is going. And as fiduciaries of the state, y'all have a really easy on-ramp to doing that, and wanted to provide you with some specific solutions today. This is really about ensuring that our state's finances are managed responsibly and effectively, that we're getting the best return on our investments through our credits and incentive systems, and most importantly, that they're benefiting every Georgian. So thank y'all for doing this work. We really believe this is a great start, and Chairman Blackman, Chairman Hofstadler, we want you to know that GBPI stands ready and willing to be a collaborator to make sure that we're making meaningful progress this year as y'all do this work throughout the state and issue a report in December.
Okay, and first question, and also I apologize, I know you feel like you had to be rushed.
That's
but
okay.
we could go over a few minutes if we had
That's
to,
okay.
so sometimes when you're last. But I want to get back to that point. You said you thought we should do an annual review with maybe a permanent committee that does that.
Yes, sir.
But if I heard you, you're saying that Florida is doing it every 3 years and neighboring states every 4 years.
Yes, sir. I mean, not every state is doing it every year. I mean, setting it up to permanent at some sort of regular interval is better than where we are now, which is not doing it at all. We'd love to see it happen every year, but certainly if it happened at some sort of regular schedule, that would be a fantastic move in the right direction.
Is there anything we're doing that we ought to keep doing? Stacy?
That's a good question, Chairman Blackman. I think what you're doing right now is exactly what you should keep doing. You know, we should be looking at this issue and talking about it and figuring out how that we can best review getting a return on our investment here. So I think this process is something we should keep doing. This is what we could be doing every 3 years, every 4 years, or maybe every year.
Do you come to some of our meetings during session?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I've been
Good.
at GBPAT for about a year, so I've got my sea legs under me, and y'all may have seen me in the back this session, but you'll see a lot more of me.
And you said Moody Road. Did you say something about Moody Road?
Yes, sir.
You're off Moody
My
Road?
parents built a house on Fox Bend right off of Moody Road, so that is.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're right down the road.
There was no Houston County High School when I graduated.
Yeah, well, me either, but we're showing our age there,
I
aren't
know, we are.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, tell me again what you mean like in 5 over here, when you require in-state residency.
Yes.
I mean, tell me exactly what you're referring to there.
Yeah, when we are issuing job tax credits or any other type of tax credit or incentive for a corporation business moving into Georgia, we should have either some sort of percentage requirement of in-state hires, residents of Georgia. Only about 19% right now, the job tax credits the
For
state.
what period of time?
Well, I mean, I think that should be permanent as long as they're getting the tax credit.
Well, and I'm not trying to be argumentative.
Yeah, no, I
I
hear
truly don't understand. So if a job is created in this place and somebody moves from Alabama to take that job, you wouldn't give them the credit?
Oh, no, absolutely, as long as
Okay,
they're a
that-
Georgia resident in that job. So if the company's providing, let's just say 10,000 jobs a year, right, that we want to say a majority of those jobs, so let's say 7,000 of those jobs are going to in-state residents, folks that live in Georgia, whether they moved here or already lived here. We want to make sure that's happening right now.
Well, I mean, that's, and again, I'm not trying to be argumentative. My understanding was if the job created in Georgia, the job had to be worked in Georgia, therefore all the jobs would be in-state
Well,
residency.
not all of the jobs are going to permanent residents of Georgia. A lot of times we have fly-in folks, or because of COVID now, a lot of remote working is happening. So only about 20% of those job tax credits are actually going to permanent Georgia residents right now.
I'd like to see that information.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to share that with you.
And again, the question I wanted to have on that is, when you talk about in-state residency, are you talking about they're from out of state, but they're working in Georgia for a period of time, 6, 8 months, a year at a time, but they fly back home on weekends, et cetera? Because if so, they're paying Georgia taxes while they're here.
Well, they're paying Georgia income tax, but they're not paying Georgia property tax. They're not
Well, there's a lot of
contributing
people
towards
that
our
don't pay.
school systems
There's a
and
lot of
other
people that don't pay
things.
Georgia property tax that
I
choose to
understand- I
not
understand that.
to own a property. Okay, so that was it. Again, I'm not trying
These
to
are
argue.
simply recommendations from other states that we've seen that could be
And again,
helpful.
I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to understand what means in-state.
Totally understand.
Because then the question I would have, and this is truly I'd ask you to help us with the Interstate Commerce Clause
Yes, sir.
Related to that, because I'm of the opinion that we can't provide something for a Georgia resident that somebody that comes in from out of state. I thought there was some sort of a prohibition.
Absolutely.
About treating that difference with the Commerce Clause. So if you have some information from other states on that, that would be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to help on that. I mean, I think because of the interdependency of our economy, that's really hard to mandate, and I understand that. And so there are some past solutions that we've seen that have worked in other states, and we'd be happy to offer those details. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Representative Buckner, thank you.
I do, I don't know if this is on or not, but, several years ago, when Larry O'Neill was the chair of House Ways and Means, we started putting sunsets on almost all of the tax bills. Sometimes some get through without it, but we've been pretty consistent with that over the years. And I'm the one on the committee lots of times that say, oops, there's no sunset. So I'm very familiar with that and very supportive of that. When that comes back at the end of that sunset, there generally is a pretty good review of what happened with that tax credit. Would that not count as when you said that all of the tax credits should be evaluated? We're doing that on a rotating basis, tax credit by tax credit, it seems to me. But you may see it different, and I just was
No,
curious.
that's a great question, Representative. First of all, I would say based on our analysis at GBPI, there's a good chunk of tax credits that don't have sunsets. And so during this review process, we really encourage y'all to look at all of them and make sure that each of them has a sunset attached to it. And I think, Representative, I would say that, you know, it really depends on the timing of that sunset. If you're talking a sunset in 20 years, y'all aren't getting any information to really understand the return on investment of that incentive or credit until it's meant to be complete. And what if something's not working? What if you wanted to tweak it? What if you wanted to sunset it earlier? What if you wanted to grow it? You wouldn't know that until you were getting to the end of it. So I think in any of our financial investments, we all are getting balance sheets monthly, you know, in our businesses to look how things are going. We encourage y'all to do that more often than you're doing now.
I'd love to see the list of all the ones that don't have sunsets.
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know that this really is a question about tax incentives, which is what we're talking about, but just Georgia public policy, do y'all have a stand on where you are with reducing income taxes in general?
Does the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute have a stand on reducing income tax? Well, what we'd like to see is a more fair and equitable balance of income tax. Currently, you know, those who pay the majority of their income, about 10% of their income, are our lowest earners. You know, those that are making $20,000 or less in Georgia are paying 10% of their income towards income tax versus our top 1% of earners that are making over $450,000 a year are only paying 7% of their income towards income tax. So our opinion is there needs to be some move to make that more fair and equitable. We certainly don't support a elimination of state income tax.
Okay, well, I thought maybe y'all were against reduction in income tax and you know, wanted us to try to spend more in the budget and do other things, so just
Well,
checking.
we have ideas about how to spend money, of course, but not in this instance.
I have never spoken with anybody from GPB buying anything that has to do with the budget is near and dear to me, so I would love to have any discussion you would like to have, so.
I'll follow up with you.
Given the last change, I'm sorry, but given the last change to the income tax, it's my understanding that people with $20,000 of income after the standard deduction hardly pay any, if at all, state income tax.
Right, well, that'll happen with the implementation of the flat tax I'm talking about prior to.
No, I'm talking about with the standard deduction in place
No,
today.
right now
They pay virtually nothing.
No, they're paying about 10% of their income.
No, they're not, because the state tax rate is 5.75.
I'm happy to share that information with you.
Well, how would you pay 10% on your income if the rate is 5.75? Tell me how that
I'm
would
talking
happen.
about of your total income that goes out. It's not the percentage, it's the total income that goes out the door.
Again, I don't understand what means out the door. You said their income, if they make $20,000 a year and the maximum tax rate is 5.75, how do they pay 10% of that total income?
I'm happy to share that math with you and the analysis that our analysts have done.
No, you mean income tax, right, not overall tax?
Overall tax.
Okay, we're just
I thought, yeah,
Sorry
I
about
figured
that.
you probably meant.
Thank you, Stacy. I have a question for you.
Yes.
Does the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute think tax credits are racist?
I think that's a bold question, Senator. I think that some of our tax credits are built on racist policies, yes, and I think that we need to be looking at who's most harmed by our policies and making sure that we are not targeting the harm of our policies on any particular population in the state. I mean, when we look at those suffering the most based on our tax code and tax system in state, it is Black Georgians. And so I think that is an appropriate question to ask as we're doing this review of the tax code, is making sure that we adjust for that historical and systemic racism that's built into this system.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any. We do, it's important we have dialogue, whether we agree on things.
Absolutely. I appreciate y'all having us here, and we certainly stand ready to provide information and be helpful, and I thank y'all for being patient for some of my missteps today as I'm learning too.
All right, well, thank you for that information.
Thank you, Chairman.
The meeting, oh, I'm sorry, I got handed it, I was thinking it was still on. Thank you for that information. The meeting that's the entire agenda for today. The next meeting is in Rome. It's September 20th, and it will be right next to Berry College in a nice facility that our governor has spoken at. And we'll get all the details out on that and work through the technical issues too. So with that, unless you need to add something.
Thanks to all our presenters and speakers today, and thanks to the panelists for being here. We enjoyed being in Savannah.
We sure do. All right, meeting adjourned.